Summer, 1941. North Africa has become a chessboard where the fate of the war is being decided. Erwin Rommel and his Afrika Korps have pushed British forces back, threatening to break through toward Egypt and the Suez Canal, the lifeline of the British Empire. The British are preparing a counter-offensive, Operation Crusader, an attempt to break the siege of Tobruk and reclaim Cyrenaica. But there's a problem. Axis air power dominates the skies, flying out of a chain of airfields along the coast. Every plane that takes off is a direct threat to the British advance on the ground. High Command needs a way to hit those airfields before the offensive begins. The problem is, they sit hundreds of kilometers behind enemy lines. No conventional bombing run can guarantee destroying them all. Something different is needed. Someone different. Among the units sent to the Middle East that year is No. 8 Guards Commando, part of a larger group known as Lay Force. Two young officers serve side by side here, and neither of them yet knows he's about to change the shape of modern warfare. The first is David Stirling. 25 years old, Scottish, tall, aristocratic, and by his own admission, a poor fit for conventional military life. He was sent down from Cambridge for gambling and drinking. He once trained to be the first man to climb Everest. Restless, charming, a natural at winning people over, but famously bad at discipline and paperwork. The second is John Jock Lewis. Born in Calcutta, raised in the Australian outback, later an Oxford rowing champion. Where Stirling is loose and charismatic, Lewis is ascetic, exacting, almost puritanical in his discipline. The men who would later serve under both of them put it simply: Stirling was the backbone. Lewis was the brains. By early 1941, both share the exact same frustration. Lay Force's operations keep collapsing, cancelled, or ending in costly failure at Crete and along the Litani River. Neither man is willing to accept that this is what elite soldiering is supposed to look like. Then, almost by accident, opportunity arrives. A shipment of 50 parachutes, originally meant for a parachute brigade being formed in India, is misrouted and ends up in Alexandria, in Lewis's hands. Impressed by Germany's airborne assault on Crete weeks earlier, Lewis has already been turning over an idea. What if a small number of men could be dropped by air, deep behind enemy lines, to strike where no one expects them? He gets permission from his commanding officer to experiment. There's just one problem. There is no parachute training school anywhere in the Middle East. None of the men are qualified. The aircraft Lewis borrows, an old Valentia bomber converted for mail delivery, isn't even properly rigged for static line jumps. Stirling, drawn by the same idea, is among the very first to volunteer for the jumps. The results are immediately, brutally dangerous. During one of the earliest jumps, faulty static lines fail. 2 men fall to their deaths. It's a devastating blow. And yet, once the equipment is repaired, Lewis and Stirling insist on being the first to jump again the very next day. It's on one of these experimental jumps that Stirling's parachute malfunctions. He lands hard, his body twisted, temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. He'll spend the next 2 months in a hospital bed in Alexandria. But the injury doesn't end the idea. It sharpens it. Lying in that hospital bed, replaying his conversations with Lewis about the military potential of parachuting, Stirling starts drafting something far more ambitious than a single raid. A small, permanent raiding force. 4-man teams. Stealth over firepower. Precision over mass. Convinced that going through the normal chain of command would get his idea killed by bureaucracy, Stirling does something audacious. Still on crutches, he makes his way to Middle East headquarters in Cairo, bypasses the checkpoint. Some accounts say he climbed a fence to do it, and talks his way into a meeting with the commander-in-chief himself, General Claude Auchinleck. Auchinleck approves the concept on the spot. Stirling is promoted to captain and given permission to recruit 6 officers and 60 men. The unit is deliberately named L Detachment Special Air Service Brigade. a name designed to trick enemy intelligence into believing Britain already has a full airborne brigade operating in the region, when in truth, it doesn't exist yet at all. Stirling knows immediately who he needs beside him. He brings Lewis on as his second-in-command, placing him in charge of training the new unit, a decision that will define everything the SAS becomes. At Kabrit, on the edge of the Suez Canal, the two men's opposite personalities turn into a system. Where the commandos had trained recruits up to a standard, nursing along whoever they'd already picked, Lewis does the reverse. He sets a brutally high minimum standard from day one and ruthlessly returns to their old units any man who can't meet it. He teaches the survivors to navigate by the stars, move without sound at night, survive on almost no water, and he never asks anything of his men that he hasn't already done himself. Stirling, meanwhile, fights an entirely different battle against the military bureaucracy that won't easily hand over vehicles, weapons, or legitimacy to an unproven unit. At one point, he organizes an unauthorized nighttime requisition of supplies from a nearby New Zealand camp just to keep the unit equipped. Together, they choose a motto that will outlive them both. Who dares wins. 1941. L Detachment is as ready as 3 months of training can make it. Now it needs a target. The mission is codenamed Operation Squatter. The objective: parachute in on the night of November 16, 1941, 2 days before the launch of Operation Crusader, and simultaneously strike the German and Italian airfields at Gazala and Timimi, destroying as many aircraft on the ground as possible before they can threaten the offensive. The plan splits the force into 4 sections, each assigned a separate airfield, to be flown in by 5 aging RAF Bristol Bombay transport planes. Every man will carry Lewis bombs by hand, compact enough that a single soldier can carry up to 20 of them. Extraction depends on a crucial partner, the Long Range Desert Group, a specialized desert reconnaissance unit tasked with meeting the survivors at a rendezvous point after the attack and driving them hundreds of kilometers back through hostile territory to safety. But time is short, and the unit is already smaller than planned. Several men, including 2 key section leaders, are still recovering from injuries sustained during the brutal parachute training at Kabrit, including 2 fatal accidents in October caused by faulty static lines. Of the roughly 65 men originally recruited, Stirling will go into the operation with only about 54 fit to jump, split into 4 sections. November 16th, as the aircraft take off toward their targets, the weather turns violently against them. One of the worst storms the region has seen in years hits at the exact moment the operation begins. Hurricane-force winds combined with torrential rain, almost unheard of in the desert. Stirling faces the hardest decision of his career: abort and risk the fledgling unit being disbanded before it ever proves itself, or press on into conditions no parachute manual had ever accounted for. He chooses to press on. The result is chaos. Battered by wind and enemy anti-aircraft fire, the pilots can't accurately locate the drop zones. Men land scattered, miles apart from each other, many dragged violently across the ground by the wind on impact. Injuries are constant. The equipment containers carrying most of the Lewis bombs are lost in the storm, leaving several sections with no way to complete their mission, even if they reach their targets. Entire sections are separated, unable to find each other or orient themselves toward the rendezvous point with the long-range desert group. Of the roughly 54 to 65 men who took part in the jump, only a small fraction, between 21 and 25, according to surviving records, make it to the rendezvous point in the days that follow. The rest are dead, wounded, captured, or simply lost to the desert. In purely military terms, Squatter is close to a total failure. Not a single enemy aircraft is destroyed. Regrouped with the battered remains of his unit at Jagbub, Stirling could have accepted that this was the end of L Detachment. Instead, he promises there will be a next time. That promise rests on one hard-won conclusion drawn directly from the disaster. Night parachuting over the open desert is simply too unpredictable to rely on for insertion. The solution, Stirling decides, is to abandon the airborne approach altogether. and use the long-range Desert Group's vehicles not just for extraction, but to drive his men all the way to the target. This single change in doctrine, born directly out of squatters' failure, becomes the unit's standard method of operation for the rest of the war. Over the next 15 months, the combined SAS-LRDG partnership destroys close to 400 enemy aircraft on the ground, more than the RAF shot down in aerial combat over the same period, along with hundreds of vehicles and dozens of fuel depots. Jock Lewis never lives to see that legacy take shape. He's killed in action just 6 weeks after Squatter, on December 30th, 1941, when his vehicle is strafed by an enemy aircraft while returning from a raid. But the standard he set at Cabret, the discipline, the rigor, the refusal to lower the bar, outlives him. Stirling himself is captured in January 1943 and spends the rest of the war as a prisoner. From a catastrophic jump in the middle of a desert storm came the doctrine that would define modern special forces for the next 8 decades and inspire the creation of elite units across the entire Western world.